Rouge Radio. How we doing out there, football fans? My name is Tyler Bieber, the host of Rouge Radio. Thanks once again for joining us here. Jam-packed show for you this evening. Big news, Kerry Joseph, Dimitri Sumpas, Zach Collaros, the Edmonton Eskimos. Just a ton to get to, and we're going to get to it right away. And joining me tonight, we have two folks joining me tonight. We have Andrew Deutschmann, who was with me last week, and joining us as well will be Daniele Franceschi, and he on the Argonauts, gentlemen. So the big news out, Kerry Joseph spent 11 years in the Canadian Football League with the Ottawa Renegades, Saskatchewan Roughriders, Toronto Argonauts, and Eskimos. He was named the most outstanding player during the 2007 CFL regular season. Along the way, led the Saskatchewan Roughriders to the Grey Cup Championship that year, defeating the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. Ends his career with 27,491 yards passing and 144 touchdown passes. And when you think of Kerry Joseph, you may not necessarily think of a guy who is the outstanding player that many people think he was. And I think you look back to what he did in Ottawa and helping stabilize a team that needed a lot of help from the get-go, and had a 1,000-yard rushing season for that organization. Ultimately, they, of course, folded, and the Renegade players were dispersed. Joseph wound up with the Saskatchewan Roughriders, and in his second year with new head coach Kent Austin, was able to win a Grey Cup championship. And then there was a little bit of a contract dispute with the Roughriders, wound up going to the Toronto Argonauts in a trade where he spent a few years there, and then ultimately wound up his career with the Edmonton Eskimos and retires at the age of 40. And Daniele, Kerry Joseph, a huge leader. Talk about the things he did on and off the field as a player to help young guys develop their careers.
Well, one way you would describe a guy like Kerry Joseph, and you hear it quite often with a lot of these more veteran players, and of course having the opportunity to be around the guys, the current Argonauts team, of course, with the likes of Ricky Ray, and just how in awe these younger guys especially are of Ricky, and especially at the quarterback position, where as of right now, even going into last season, where we are a particularly young group at the quarterback position behind Ricky, of course. We had Zach Collaros, who was released earlier today, but Trevor Harris as well, along with Mitchell Gale and Josh Portis. So a young group of quarterbacks there that when you hear them talk about Ricky, he's really like a role model. They idolize him, and they just try to replicate everything that they can do when they look at a guy like that. And Kerry Joseph, the word that comes to mind, well, one of the phrases I would say, is a consummate professional. The guy comes in, goes about his business, does what he has to do, leads by example. And I think we really saw the leadership come out in him when he was in Edmonton over the past few years, working with younger guys like Matt Nichols, and of course even having to fight for a job there, competing with Stephen Giles a couple years back as well, of course with Mike Riley and the aforementioned Matt Nichols. So we've seen that growth from him, and I think he just brings a calming presence about him, and I think that's another major reason as to why the Eskimos a couple of years ago in the playoffs against the Argos elected to start Kerry Joseph over a young Matt Nichols, because of the leadership, the veteran presence in the huddle, just that calming factor. Although the Argonauts were, won that game fairly easily and dominated that game from start to finish. But the Eskimos, if you recall, had a good start in that football game, and it was Kerry Joseph who had a touchdown pass to Kerry Koch in that football game in the first quarter. I believe it might have been even the opening drive of that game. So just there's many things, and of course having the opportunity to watch him here in Toronto for the couple of years that he was here wasn't great at all overall. Just didn't fit in, didn't mix in well, but the rest of his career, wherever he's gone, of course, Saskatchewan was one of the things that made him one of the more prominent players in the league, of course, being the league MVP, most outstanding player, as we call it here in the Canadian Football League, and, of course, also leading them to that Grey Cup But he's just gone about his business, done what he does what he has to do day in and day out. He's that guy that when you look to him, you know what he's doing what he needs to do in order to put his team in the best possible position to succeed come game day.
Now, Andrew, you had first-hand experience with Kerry Joseph when he was on that Grey Cup run with the Saskatchewan Roughriders, being in Vancouver with the BC Lions there. 2006, they struggled immensely with the crowd noise, and it was a blowout win for the BC Lions as they went on to win the Grey Cup over the Montreal Alouettes. But the following year was the year they brought in Kent Austin, did the Saskatchewan Roughriders, and his calming presence and work with Kerry Joseph enabled that Roughriders team to go back into BC Place and pull out a huge win. So just talk about what you saw from Kerry Joseph throughout his career and the leadership, that he had and the things that he did from 2006 to 2007 or even other games he played against the BC Lions that, you look at him and say, that's the type of quarterback that you may want on your football team.
Well, I think the leadership is a huge thing. I mean, when you look at the past couple of years with Edmonton, I mean, he's had to compete for a job even though he's a former MVP. He's had tremendous success, and he took it on the chin, and he accepted whatever job he could get. And I think that speaks wonders about his leadership. And I just always noticed how dynamic he was. He could take off and run when he needed to. He had a very good arm. He had a very good group of players around him in Saskatchewan when they went on to win the Grey Cup in 2007. And it was unfortunate for him that he couldn't get another deal with them, and ultimately his career started to go in a bit of a downspin after that. Obviously it didn't hurt Saskatchewan getting Darian Durant in and starting right after that. But yeah, Kerry Joseph had a tremendous CFL career, and I wish him all the best in his future.
Now, last season we had Mike Riley on the program, and he touted the tremendous leadership that Kerry Joseph brought out. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens going forward for the Edmonton Eskimos, because Kerry Joseph barely played. He was more of a short yardage situation type quarterback, got in a little bit. But leadership. I think leadership may be a little bit underrated when you talk about a football team, because without that veteran presence, at the end of the day, you just have a bunch of young guys who are just going out there and throwing the football or trying to catch the football and make a play. And at the end of the day, it may not always work out to be what you want it to be. And Daniele, you talk about coach leadership and all that, and mentioned Zach Collaros. He was released today by the Toronto Argonauts. He's now eligible to sign with any CFL organization or any NFL organization or Arena Football League or whatever he likes as of this very moment, as opposed to waiting until the opening of the free agency period on February 15th. Now, in terms of the CFL, first have it that he's going to be going to either the Hamilton Tiger Bombers, and Kent Austin was able to carry Joseph in developing his skill set and using it to his advantage. What sorts of things could Kent Austin do to help further develop the game of Zach Collaros? And what did you see out of Zach Collaros last season, or even in 2012 when he played against the Hamilton Tiger Cats in the final game of the season, that you think will allow Zach Collaros to be a week-to-week starter in the Canadian Football League and have success in doing so?
Well, I think you have to start with his mobility. That's one of the things that I think really surprised a lot of people. Even the coaching staff here in Toronto, they were aware of it, and obviously for a lot of fans that didn't have the opportunity to watch him in his days at Cincinnati, weren't aware of his awareness and his ability to be so active in the pocket, moving around, and the Argos really tried to mold their offense around that. They had package. It wasn't as I would say diverse as what you have with Ricky Ray in there, where the ball is obviously being aired out almost every single play because you have a future Hall of Fame quarterback at the helm. But with Zach Collaros, you could see the raw abilities. He has good arm strength. He has the intangibles. He's a hard worker. He's learning. He learned from one of the best in Ricky Ray as well. And for that long stretch of games, of course, that he started, and they went on that impressive road winning streak. Even Scott Milanovic noted that they didn't expect him to win that many games out of that entire stretch. Even Jim Barker today, as he discussed the decision to release Collaros, mentioned that you don't expect a rookie quarterback to go on that type of run, and it was impressive to see that. And you mentioned Hamilton and Kent Austin. Well, we've seen what Kent Austin can do with young quarterbacks already a little bit. Obviously, you had Henry Burris there, get him all the way to the Grey Cup, plant the seed already for the future, because the guy Dan Lefevre, who right next to him, and of course, even their younger quarterbacks as you go down the depth chart, have had that opportunity to gain that experience, of course, and they've been very active. Kent Austin does a good job of getting everybody involved. And it wasn't just Henry Burris going out there and tossing the football around. It was everybody. Of course, we saw Dan Lefevre be a major contributor, especially in the playoffs, and especially that game against Montreal in the Eastern semifinal, where he was a pivotal factor in that game, I think, especially with those weather conditions, a windy day out in Guelph, in those outdoor elements. He played a big factor. So Kent Austin has done a good job of grooming along quarterbacks, and of course his history with Kerry Joseph, doing a good job of making him a most outstanding player type caliber guy in 2007, and obviously en route to winning a Grey Cup there. So he has history of that. He has a successful track record with that, and maybe, who knows, we might be seeing that Zach Collaros and Kerry Joseph potentially. It's interesting to see where even Kerry Joseph, if he'd be interested in having a coach coming back to football in a coaching capacity, whether it's in the CFL or anything, because we talk about his leadership and all the aspects that he brings to the football field. It would be interesting to see what capacity he could have going forward, even post his football career. But in terms of just Zach Collaros, I think there's a lot of potential there with Ken Austin. But also, on the flip side, you mentioned the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, and I think there's a lot of potential there too, because he has the ties with Mike O'Shea, who he knows very well from his time here in Toronto as a special teams coordinator, and of course all the other members of the coaching staff that Mike O'Shea took from Toronto with him to Winnipeg.
And you mentioned the quotes of Jim Barker earlier today, just a couple here that I have. First, he says, "This has nothing to do with our relationship. We have a great relationship. He can now go and do the things he has to do to see where things are at, and it will give us a little bit more clarity." Continuing on, Jim Barker, general manager of the Toronto Argonauts, said, "We've been trying to sign him, and obviously he wants to go for free agency, which is totally his right, but we're not going to pull out." And so he's released from his contract a little bit early. He has about 17 days to see what he can muster up before the free agency period officially opens up on February 15th. And Andrew, first, is Zach Collaros the type of quarterback that if you were a general manager in free agency here that you would want as your starter or as your backup? And secondly, what did you see? Because he had a very superb outing against the BC Lions and caught, as Daniele mentioned, teams and even his coaches off guard with his running ability, and that was a huge factor in that game against the BC Lions. But what would you do if you're a GM starting to look for a quarterback? How would you attack that?
Saw in those two plays where he avoided sacks from Adam Bighill, who's a tough guy to make plays on the fly. He can do all these things, and that's something that makes him seem not like a rookie quarterback, but someone with 3 or 4 years experience. And I think he's well on his way to being a starter and someone that any team should be chasing after for their starter this year.
My name is Tyler Bieber, along with Daniele Franceschi and Andrew Deutschmann. Now, Daniele, you mentioned Mike O'Shea and the Winnipeg Blue Bombers and the familiarity. I mean, he was the special teams coordinator, but having been as close to the organization as you are and as you have been and currently are, what sorts of things would a special teams coordinator like Mike O'Shea see in a guy like Zach Collaros that he would want to bring to Winnipeg and use to his advantage for an organization that, frankly, has struggled for years to find play out of the most important position on a football roster? They had Buck Pierce. They got some stuff out of him. He led them to a Grey Cup championship appearance in 2011, but they have struggled since they let go of Kevin Glenn to find the stability week to week. And If you're Mike O'Shea, what do you see in Zach Collaros from your time together with the Toronto Argonauts that will benefit the Winnipeg Blue Bombers?
Well, in addition to what you already mentioned from what Jim Barker said earlier today after confirming the release of Collaros, he also mentioned that one of the things that Zach has going for him is the fact that he just seems to find ways to win games. And from that perspective, if you're any team, he's a proven winner. He has a track record, of course, already, although it's a small sample size, but the record speaks for itself. His performances speak for themselves, and I think from that alone, statistically, and obviously all the tangibles and intangibles that coaches and general managers look at when evaluating players, he's one of the guys that has the most upside. And, of course, Winnipeg is going to have potentially, we haven't seen, of course, Henry Burris. We haven't heard too much of his status and what his direction may be going forward, if he's engaged in contract talks with the Hamilton Tiger Cats, or what his future may hold. We're not too sure yet. But if you had to pick between Henry Burris or Zach Collaros to sign this offseason, if you're the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, I think hands down, with the coaching staff that they have and the prior knowledge that they have working with Zach Collaros, they would go with a younger guy that has a much brighter future ahead of him and has a lot of different things that you can mold your offense around. We already talked about the mobility, and he's had, I think, his growth really has come as a result of being around great offensive minds like Scott Milanovich, Marcus Brady, Ricky Ray, and he's alluded to that every single time he played last year. Every week in preparation, leading up to games, he always noted that it was been a great opportunity to be able to work with those guys and grow and flourish in his role as a starting quarterback. It gave him also a sense of comfort, the fact that he knew that week in and week out for that stretch of time, regardless of what would happen, as long as he prepared properly, he would be able to put his team in the best possible position to win, to succeed. And ultimately, it came to fruition as they went on, of course, that big road winning streak, which contributed to really a significant portion of their success last season, and that, of course, without Ricky Ray. So that was a significant time period, and I think everybody saw the emotion come out of him, and I think even Jim Barker alluded to it. It was really split 50-50 between him and Trevor Harris. Both guys were very deserving, and a lot of fans said maybe Trevor Harris deserved an opportunity to go and start a game, and ultimately they went with Zach Collaros, and he proved everybody wrong, and it was really that he took the opportunity and ran with it, and that's why I think if you're Winnipeg right now and you have to pick between guys like Henry Burris or Zach Collaros, especially with the familiarity factor, you're going to lean towards Zach Collaros for sure.
Zach, team passing stats, he was 190 completions out of 287 attempts, which is 6.2 completion percentage. He had 2,316 passing yards, 14 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, the 5-2 win-loss record, and as Daniele mentioned, the record road winning streak, 4 consecutive wins on the road. That is week to week, not a cumulative total. So another retirement has been announced, and it's Calgary Stampeders offensive lineman Dimitri Sumpas. 3-time CFL All-Star, was selected second overall by the Stampeders in 2008 and was a member of that Grey Cup winning Calgary Stampeders roster in that 2008 season as they defeated the Montreal Alouettes. He played 6 seasons in the Canadian Football League, unfortunately suffered a concussion this past season that kept him out of action for a large part of the year, and ultimately really contributed to his retirement, as he mentioned in a press release earlier today, saying that he wants to err on the side of caution and didn't want to risk further damage going forward in his playing career. Now, he's going to remain on with the Calgary Stampeders as a strength and conditioning assistant coach. But, guys, concussions, they seem to be a huge issue, not necessarily as big in the past, although it was still there, but now football players are bigger, they're faster, they're stronger. You know, it's a little bit of a reckless game, as we know. Do you think that this is going to be more in the realm of possibility? A guy who, like Dimitri Sumpas, plays 6 years, is only 28 years of age, star is going to retire early, and guys are going to continue to follow this path because of the risk of brain injury. And Andrew, we'll start with your thought.
Well, I think when you look at the CFL specifically, I mean, guys obviously aren't paid a very big salary, and they have, usually a second or third jobs that they have. So the decision to retire that early, while it may seem strange to the fans, it may make sense financially, and especially for his own health. I mean, he may not necessarily need football to make a living, so he needs to protect his own health and safety as much as he can, and I truly respect that.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree completely with what Andrew said there. They have to protect their own well-being. It's ultimately, as Andrew said, the CFL, obviously, the salaries are not making millions and millions of dollars, and they have to protect the longevity of not just their careers but also their lives, and to do whatever they need to do in order to provide for their families as well. So we have to kind of separate that and take reality as well. So the decision to retire, I mean, if anything, as he said, he's Dimitris Tsipras erring on the side of caution. Well, we've seen over the years we've seen quite a few players kind of do that, not just in the CFL, but of course also in the NFL, in all football. They're putting a lot more emphasis on concussions and trying to make sure that the game is a lot safer so that people don't have issues after football, after their careers are done and over with.
I found it interesting. I saw a quote from Wes Welker, a receiver for the Denver Broncos in the National Football League, who are playing in the Super Bowl this upcoming weekend, and he said that he would play in the Super Bowl even if he had a concussion. And I thought that was interesting because he's a guy who has had 2 concussions and has been dealing with concussion symptoms earlier this season that kept him out of football games. So that was an interesting aspect of that from his standpoint. As Edmonton Eskimos, obviously they have Chris Jones there as the head coach, but they have finally announced their coaching staff. They did so earlier today. Offensive coordinator is going to be Steve McAdoo. Spent time with Chris Jones with the Toronto Argonauts. Special teams coordinator Craig Dickinson. Quarterbacks coach and passing game coordinator, and assisting a little bit in player development, is going to be Jarius Jackson, another member of the Toronto Argonauts coaching staff. 2012 Grey Cup champion with the Toronto Argonauts. Jason Shivers, defensive backs coach. He is another former Toronto Argonaut. Ed Fillion, a defensive line coach. Again, I think you can see the trend here. Another former Toronto Argonaut coach. Kes McCorvey will be the receivers coach, and you can bet, yes, he does come from the Toronto Argonauts as well. And Craig Daverin, an offensive assistant, and yes, he also comes from the Toronto Argonauts. So, Daniele, Chris Jones, he's the first one to go from the Toronto Argonauts, and then he brings a whole whackload of other coaches with him to the Edmonton Eskimos. From seeing and knowing what you know about these individuals, who he has recruited to the Edmonton Eskimos, how is this Edmonton Eskimos a team that struggled to find wins throughout the 2013 season?
Well, first, I want to say that I think that the Argos offices, the player personnel offices, are getting a little bit sparse over there. There's not too many guys in the office about now. They still haven't filled out a lot of their coaching vacancies, and of course that should come soon and in the near future, especially with the departures of a lot of their positional coaches now, as everything has kind of settled down, and now we know what Edmonton has and what Winnipeg took as well. So, but from an Edmonton perspective, I think it's interesting because Chris Jones had a lot of conflict with some of the players, and of course some well-documented things. Of course, his issues with Brandon Isaac and Ricky Foley, and the only reason that Ricky Foley really stuck around for that 2012 season was the fact that we were playing the Grey Cup at home, and he sacrificed the position and the type of game that he wanted to play so that he could get himself a Grey Cup ring and get himself in a position where obviously the last offseason, going out and signing with the Saskatchewan Roughriders and adding that to his resume, another Grey Cup championship this past season. But he's an interesting character. I thought he and Scott Milanovich worked well together because they kind of separated everything, especially the first year in 2012, where Chris was strictly the defensive side of the football and Scott was strictly the offensive side of the football. There was no coordinator involved on the offensive side, so there was no Marcus Brady. And they just basically split everything down the middle and said, listen, you take care of what you got to take care of, I'll take care of what I got to take care of, and then come game day, we'll have our guys ready to play and be in the best position to succeed. And I think as a head man, it's going to take some time for Chris Jones to adjust and to kind of oversee everything going on and to be more hands-off, because he is a very, very demanding coach. He was a very demanding coordinator in Toronto, and that's what a lot of players echo the sentiments of both he and Milanovich, that they're very demanding coaches. They demand precision and execution to the T on every single play. But everybody that he took, I mean, Eddie Fillion, a great defensive line coach. There's a lot of guys that really they loved working with him and thought that he was very beneficial for their development. A lot of young guys, especially on the Argonauts roster, looking up to both Khalif Mitchell, a veteran presence there, and Eddie Fillion. So that he's a key contributor there. Kes McCorvey has a lot of experience working with some great receivers, of course, here. One of the most dynamic receiving corps in the entire league with Chad Owens, Andre Dury. You throw in the likes of Jason Barnes, John Childs. There's a lot of depth, a lot of talent across the board, and it's very diverse as well in terms of their skill sets, and even the fact that we have quite a good Canadian content in the receiving corps with Spencer Watt and Mike Bradwell. So there's a lot of diversity there. And I think overall, you see the trend, as you said, it's going to be an easier transition phase for the Eskimos and Chris Jones, I guess, in that respect, that he's going to have that familiarity with his coaching staff, and he's hoping that they can all work together because of their knowing one another, knowing each other's tendencies, and get things together rather quickly and get the ball rolling.
What kind of head coach is Chris Jones going to be with the Edmonton Eskimos?
Well, like I said, I think he's going to have to learn to be a more hands-off head coach. I think, obviously, as a coordinator, very assertive, very demanding. I think he's still going to have that same demanding aspect. He's going to be very upfront with the guys, and he's going to demand a lot from his players. But I think overall, it's going to really depend on how where he can draw the line and create the boundaries of being an assertive head coach, but also showing that concern and really using his time wisely to have his hand in everything, to be involved in all aspects of the game, because that's going to be important. It's about forming relationships. And in Edmonton, of course, they had their fair share of issues with Kavis Reed and trying to form relationships and good bonds, positive bonds with players over the years, and that's been one of their Achilles heels. So I think it's just about changing the culture, and we'll see. I think he'll try to implement that, and he'll preach definitely just giving it 100% every time you go out there, leaving it all on the field. That's the type of coach he is, along with Scott Milanovich, just give it everything you got type of attitude, and do the little things every day. They put a lot of attention to detail every day. It's incredible. Guys that if they run an extra yard on their route, but they break a yard off that they're supposed to break, he's right on them, precision, and continues to hound that you need to study, you need to execute the playbook, you need to know what you have to do in order to make sure that everything works out well, because it is a team game, and if one person's out of position, well, then the whole play is going to go for naught. So that's the type of attitude that they developed here in Toronto over the past couple of years.
Okay, Andrew, so Jarius Jackson is the quarterback's coach, passing game coordinator, and he's going to do a little bit of player development for the Edmonton Eskimos. Now, he had a long, lengthy playing career with the BC Lions. He was the quarterback's coach for the BC Lions last season. What sorts of things is he going to bring to the fold to help Mike Riley and help his skill sets and even the backup quarterbacks, Matt Nichols or Jonathan Crompton? And what's he going to do to be able to help those guys progress as quarterbacks?
I mean, he's been a backup for his entire CFL career, so he's basically been a coach for the last 7 to 10 years. So he knows the ins and outs of the quarterback position better than just about anybody. And he does have that rapport with Mike Riley, having worked with him in BC before he moved on to Edmonton. So I think having that rapport with him and gaining that relationship with Matt Nichols, they'll be able to work together and put together some good things in Edmonton. And I think Darius has had his own issues with injuries as well, and Mike Riley's been a guy who's struggled with concussions last year and struggled with playing through his injuries and trying to troop through them. And I think that Darius will be more of a calming presence. He'll make some decisions for Riley and help him sort of make the decisions he needs to further his football career.
That's going to do it for this episode of Rouge Radio. Thanks for joining us. As always, you can check out the podcast, rougeradio.com, YouTube. We post it on there. iTunes, very listen to Rouge Radio. We thank you for your support. Daniele Franceschi, Andrew Deutschmann joining me tonight. Great show with them as well. Please be sure to tune in with us next week as we roll on towards free agency coming up on February 15th. Will Zach Collaros make his decision, or will he be still looking for that next destination? Thank you for joining us here on Rouge Radio.